These are the notes for 7.4b, triangle congruence, and I do want you to write these notes by hand, and the reason for that is because when you're writing it by hand, it helps with your retention of the material. So your options for doing these notes is you can print out this paper, this Google document, and fill it out exactly the way that I'm filling it out, or if you don't have access to a printer, you can redraw the triangles on a separate piece of paper. And when you redraw it, the triangles don't have to be exact as long as they have the same markings. Looking at this first pair of triangles, and the way that they're marked is we can see that this side is congruent to this side is congruent to this side. Right, so we have all three of these sides are congruent, so the criteria is 3 congruent sides. Or SSS for short. And when you have that information, you can conclude that those triangles are congruent. Looking at the next pair of triangles, we can see that this side is congruent to this side is congruent to this side, and this angle is congruent to this angle. So we have two sides and an angle congruent, and the angle that we have congruent is in between the two sides that are congruent, right? It's touching both of those sides. So in this case, the criteria is two sides and an included angle. And that we say as SAS, or side angle side, because the angle's in between the two sides. When you have that information, that is enough to prove that the two triangles are congruent. Looking at the next pair of triangles, in this case, this angle is congruent to that one, this angle is congruent to that one, and this angle here is congruent to this angle here. So we have 3 congruent angles. Or AAA for short. When all you know is that the angles are congruent, it's only enough to prove that the triangles are similar, but not necessarily congruent. Because as you can see, these two angles, or these two triangles, are actually different sizes. So similar kind of means same shape, but different size. Let's look at the next pair. We have one set of sides that are congruent, and then this angle is congruent to this one, and this angle is congruent to this one. So we have 2 angles that are congruent. And one side, and the side that we have is in between the 2 angles. It's touching both of those congruent angles. So it's 2 angles and an included side. And if you have that information, it's enough to prove that the 2 triangles are congruent. In this next pair, we have two right triangles. Right, and I'm going to make a note right here. These are right triangles. And what's congruent is the hypotenuse, that's this long side here, and one of the legs. And so this criteria is a hypotenuse and one leg of the right triangle. And when you, HL for short, and when you have that information, that is enough to prove that the triangles are congruent. And remember, this is for right triangles only. Last one. In this pair of triangles, we have this side is congruent to this side. This second side is congruent to this second side. And we also know that this angle is congruent to this angle. In this case, what's congruent is two sides and an angle. And the angle here that's congruent is not in between the two sides. It's only touching one of the sides, not both of them. So we're going to say this is two sides and a non-included angle. Sorry, I meant to put that in there. Two sides and a non-included angle. And when that's the case, it's not necessarily congruent. You can see from these two triangles, right, that these are not the same triangle. So we'll say not enough information. We cannot conclude that the triangles are congruent. Okay, so let's summarize. Which ones prove congruence and which ones don't? Okay, so 3 congruent sides, that proves congruence, and 2 sides and included angle, that does. 3 congruent angles, not that's similar. 2 angles and an included side, or SAS, sorry, ASA, that works. Hypotenuse legs, that works. 2 sides and a non-included angle, that one does not. So to fill out the table at the bottom, 3 congruent sides works. 2 sides and an included angle works. 2 angles and an included side. Hypotenuse leg works. And one more that we didn't have on this paper is you can also have 2 angles and a non-included side. That also proves congruence. The criteria that do not prove congruence is if you have 3 angles or 2 sides and a non-included angle.